Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, viewers, and friends of Iqra TV. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Iqbal Banak. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk. That program comes to you every week, hopefully trying to bring to you issues of interest and people of interest who can help the community understand some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. Every week I try and bring some unique people on this program who share their knowledge, their experience and their thoughts with us about a number of complex issues that all of us, regardless of our faith, our ethnicity, our backgrounds, are facing at this moment in time. And I say everybody is special on my program, but today I really have a very unique and special person who's joining me today. From his very, very busy schedule, he has taken time out to come and join us today on Iqra TV and be part of the Real Talk family. And I'm deeply grateful to him for taking this time out. When I introduce you, my guest, you will understand why I speak like this, because as I say, he is a very, very busy person. And for him to come and take time out to be here is for me an extraordinary honor as well. So can I introduce to you the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, Mr. John Robbins, who is the guest today. John, welcome to Iqra TV, welcome to Real Talk. Thank you for taking some time out. I know you have, particularly in the challenging times that we're going through at this moment, a very, very difficult and challenging life at the moment. So I'm really grateful to you. Welcome and nice to have you here, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, I mean, this is important. And as I say every week, this is a unique opportunity today we have with having John here. And anybody who wants to ring in, please feel free to do so. You'll see the number will appear on the screen, 01274 214 299. We're happy for you to share your thoughts and ideas. John, I mean, you've been a police officer for a very, very long time. You are unique, as you told me before we started the program, that many police officers join a force and they move around the country. But you were extraordinary that you joined the West Yorkshire Police Force over 30 years ago, and you remained the West Yorkshire Police Force, and now you've become the Chief Constable. I mean, that must be absolutely unique.
Yeah, I'm very proud, Iqbal. I'm in my 33rd year of policing now. I've given my vocational life, my career in policing to West Yorkshire and to UK policing, of course. It's a large force. We have to deal with all sorts of things. But I've enjoyed my career. I've been stimulated, interested and enthralled by it. And I'm still here, still going strong and love it.
For 33 years, you still look very young, as if you just joined the police force now.
Yeah, you're very kind. I think we're a similar age, really.
No, I'm much, much older than you, I'm telling you. But I mean, obviously you've seen a lot of changes taking place, both in the police service itself and in the way operations are handled outside as well, but also the community. Because 33 years ago, the black and minority ethnic community, the Muslim community in this part of the world was very different, and now it's different. What are the sort of the big changes that you've noticed over those years that affect you as a Chief Constable?
Yeah, I think we've got better at what we do. I think we've got better at investigating crime.
Right.
We've got better at speaking to people, and most of all, I think we've got better at listening to people.
Right.
And I think we're now a far more open, transparent and responsive service than we've ever been before. So previously we'd talk about community engagement, and we did it. We went out and we engaged with people, but then we retrenched back to the police station and we worked in that way. Now we're out and about and we listen. And the most important thing, alongside technology and changes in crime, is that we've got far more people from different faiths, different backgrounds, different minority ethnic heritages in policing. And I think that's what makes a difference. So openness, transparency, accountability, I think they've all changed over the decades hugely, hugely.
But as I say, we're living in challenging times, and the Chinese proverb goes that you may live in challenging times, and some say it's a curse. But over the last few years in particular, we have seen, for example, hate crime, and this is a Muslim TV channel, we talk about Islamophobia, but hate crime generally, we've seen a huge rise in hate crime. Particularly recently, we've seen a cry around disability, transgender issues, but even Islamophobia, which most of our viewers are subscribed to. We're a Muslim TV channel. We've seen an enormous rise in Islamophobia as well. Now, how does that challenge, tackling Islamophobia, in your opinion, has been sort of navigated by the police service in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well, we deal with what goes on within society, and it really is distasteful. Every type of hate crime, none of us want it, none of us want to see it, but obviously it's the police's job to deal with it. Ironically, over the last 20 years, we've been encouraging the reporting of hate crime, and I think we've been successful in that, and therefore more people are reporting it, and whether that be race or religion or gender or any type of hatred. By encouraging the reporting, we get a better picture, a truer picture of exactly what's gone on. So without getting into the technical details, I'm pleased that West Yorkshire are good at recording the crime. We do it correctly and properly. And in that way, it puts crime up, if that makes sense, because we record everything that's reported to us. Right. But I am pleased with the response that we deal with it, because we take it serious. We have dedicated officers who investigate it. We've got people called hate crime coordinators who coordinate it, and they understand it. They understand what it means for victims, they understand what it means for witnesses, and they're empathetic, and they can try and get behind it. So we are robust in it, we do what we can with it, but the reality is often they're hard crimes to detect.
Oh, I'm sure it is when witness, whether you can the witness and the evidence that required in order to prove hate crime or is quite substantial. But as I say, religious hate crimes have gone up by 37%, race hate crimes have gone up by 19%, disability 43%, transgender 47%. These are all the national statistics. I mean, I'm sure they'll be reflected in local statistics as well. But one of the challenges, and particularly after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and I was involved in the review of that, was that the number of incidents being reported was probably just about 30%, and 70% were not being reported. And then in those days, one of the recommendations by Lord Macpherson was that we should set up reporting centres. Do we still have reporting centres in West Yorkshire?
Yes, you can report in a whole host of different ways, hate crime, through organisations like Tell Mama, specifically for your listeners and watchers, viewers, but also there's online reporting now, and there's third-party reporting places at any council location, and a whole host of other charities. So that's why I said earlier we worked really hard to try and get people to report it, so we get a real clear picture of it. The interesting thing around a lot of these hate crimes, they're all distasteful and they're all wrong and they're all bad. Thankfully, not many of them actually involve physical violence or involving people getting harmed or hurt. But that doesn't mean that they're not hurting people within, and they're not hurting people and offending people. Of course, we're now recording hate crime that occurs online. So threats and intimidation that's on the internet or on social media, we're also recording a high number of those. So that's partially why the numbers have also gone up more recently.
Right. Yeah, obviously that's a factor that we acknowledge, that the more people report, the numbers are going to go up. But there was a huge issue around trust and confidence as well in the police service. Do you still see that as a challenge for you as a Chief Constable, gaining the trust and confidence of the community? Because from my side, when I talk to certain people, they still say there's no point in reporting, even if it's a burglary or what you might consider to be a minor incident, but for the victim it might be a substantial sort of impact on their life, that there's no point in reporting to the police because they don't turn up. And I mean, this is universal. It's not unique to West Yorkshire. I mean, how do you try and make sure that people have more trust and faith in you when you have this sort of narrative going around?
Yeah. We do turn up, we do come, especially for serious crime. We record absolutely everything, so every time somebody rings us, we do make a record of it. And I really would encourage people to not follow that narrative and to try us. Ring us, contact us, report it, because it's better now than it's been in a long time. We've had some real challenges over the last year with funding and resources, but certainly in West Yorkshire I've been absolutely determined that the public of West Yorkshire should be able to record crime, report crime, contact their police, and we're getting better and better at that all of the time. So you've got to have faith and trust that we'll deal with it. We are here for people, we're here for the communities of West Yorkshire. We're all made up of the communities of West Yorkshire. We're not this separate entity of police officers. We're members of the public who put a uniform on, and we come and do, in the main, a good job as to what they do within the restrictions. So they must report it, because we will come, and anybody who doesn't turn up, I'd like to know about it. All
right, okay. So you've heard it there from the main man himself. If you report something and nobody turns up, you need to ring John here. I mean, I'm sure you've got lots of people there in between who will bring that to your attention. But I mean, one of the factors that has affected the whole of the country is the whole of the austerity and the loss of the number of personnel within the police service. over the last 10, 15 years in particular. And I'm sure that has had a devastating effect on the way you police our communities. And that has had an impact. How are things at the moment?
Well,
I know the government says we want to recruit 20,000 new police officers.
Yeah, so
but are they just replacing who we've lost? It's not new police officers.
So over the course of the whole country, there are additional police officers to just the replacement. So as people retire and resign, we replace those. And those 20,000 nationally are over 3 years, and it's additional. But the reality of that is it's just taken us back to 2010 levels. Yeah. So it's just topping up as to where we were before, which is welcome and it's good. But at the same time as that, the budget for policing hasn't increased. So we're then making savings and we're having less police staff in other areas of it. So it's all kind of levelling itself out, really. We all understand we've got a duty as public servants to contribute towards the challenges in the economy. But that term, the thin blue line, it really is a thin blue line. And if we reduce police officer numbers, there's nobody else who's going to come and do the job behind officers and staff. There's nobody else waiting in the wings to do the jobs that we do. And in reality, we're picking up the work of other agencies when they haven't got the resources to deal with what they need to do. So yeah, it is really challenging. It's challenging for the officers and staff. And it means that sometimes we don't have as many neighbourhood policing officers as we would want, and I think we need, and the communities of West Yorkshire and the whole country deserve. It means we don't have as many response officers, as many investigators. So we do the best with what we've got. But when things don't work in policing, it tends to be blamed upon policing, not because they haven't got the resources. When things don't work in the NHS or in teaching, they say, oh, well, we haven't got enough resources, and people believe that. But just maybe it's the way it works with policing. People tend to think that we can't or won't do what we do. We definitely know what we want to do, but we don't always have the resources to do it.
Right. So it's mainly down to resources, and that's not going to change, is it? So how smart, I mean, obviously the government will say we need to have smart policing.
Yep.
And we need to change the method and the process in which we police our communities. I've just noted the word neighbourhood policing. Yeah. I mean, virtually every community will say we need more neighbourhood policing, which they used to have. Yeah. I mean, I remember going back 30 years, I knew the police officer who used to beat my area, and I knew him by name, and I used to hello to him every morning, and then every afternoon I used to see him, and he became sort of acquaintances in a way, not friends, but acquaintances. Yeah. And that touch is no longer. Do you think we will ever get that back? Because that actually gave you intelligence as well as to what was happening in certain neighbourhoods, and it gave the community some comfort in knowing that they have an officer that they've probably got friendly with, that they could relate to and maybe take some of the concerns to them.
That's exactly the sort of policing model that we want. It's still there, so there still are neighbourhood police officers, PCs and PCSOs
but we
across
don't see
West
them on
Yorkshire.
the street, you see, that's why.
Because they're busy, they're going from job to job, and that's the dilemma, isn't it? Because there's more crime recorded, there's more investigations, and the depth and the care that we take in those crimes, it takes them longer to deal with it. So it's not through a desire not to be able to do it, there's just not enough of them. So 80% of our budget is spent on people. We are a people function. It's human beings trying to look after other people.
So how big is the force at the moment in terms of both policing,
10,500
frontline police officers?
Yeah, so 10,500 officers and staff, but of course they all work shifts. The overwhelming majority of them work shifts. We've got to keep people safe from terrorism, from serious and organised crime,
and we've had
investigate homicide. We've got to investigate safeguarding, rape, sexual offences. And so a lot of the work that policing does is unseen to the public. So the resources within serious and organised crime, counter-terrorism, homicide investigations, safeguarding, and by that I mean domestic abuse, rape, sexual offences, all of that's happening not through officers on the streets. They're dedicated resources who are working, who are desperately trying to help victims and witnesses across West Yorkshire. But we don't see them.
I know it's a thankless task, I know that.
No, but we don't see them, and I wish you could see them. Because if you could see what they're doing, they do amazingly brilliant work. So I want more officers on the streets. But if we deploy all those officers to the streets, we'll all feel better because we'll see them, but all of that other work will stop. And then the serious end of crime and criminality. So it's a real balance and a real dilemma for me to sort of understand. I do understand what communities want to see, but we've got all of these other priorities, these serious and organised criminals that we've got to combat as well.
I understand the priority, and I understand, whoever you are, whether you're white, black, brown, male, female, a person of faith or no faith, if you're the victim of a crime or an incident, then you want immediate response.
Yeah.
and you want somebody to do something about it.
Yeah.
And that is a huge task and a challenge for you as an organisation.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But when sometimes people are the victims, right, whether it's a minor crime or a minor incident or a major crime, and they feel that they've not had the type of response that they would hope that they'd get, maybe their expectations are much higher than what they should be. How do you overcome that perception that people have that the police are not there for me?
Well, it's hard, isn't it? It's difficult because people tend to contact us in the most difficult times in their lives when they've been subject to crime or criminality, and often we want this ability to come and solve all of the problems for everything. If the response is due to poor attitude or poor behaviour of the police officers or staff, then we can deal with that. But that's very rarely the case. Usually the response is tied up into not enough resources, not enough time to investigate or to follow things through. And that's what I was alluding to earlier. In the main, when that happens in other sectors, people then tend to understand that sector, NHS or teaching or public services, don't have enough money. When it happens in policing, it somehow is felt that we're not doing our job properly or we're not trying hard enough. So we've got to get better at explaining that, of saying, in reality, there's not enough of us, and in reality, we can't give everybody the service that they would like and we would like to give. But it comes back to resources, it comes back to money, and what sort of police service society wants and what sort of police service politicians want, quite frankly.
Because at the end of the day, you have the resources that were given to you are given by politicians. And they make the decisions at the end of the day. And obviously, in your council tax, you pay for it through the precept that we all pay for. And I know you're responsible for the operational side of the policing service, not the political side of the service. And that is something that Alison Lowe, for example, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner, and her colleagues are responsible for that. But I mean, when you go to Alison and say, I want more money, what sort of reaction do you get from the politicians?
To be fair, from the Mayor, Tracy Brabin, and the Deputy Mayor, Alison Lowe, have had a fantastic reaction and a great deal of support for policing. So they've put up the local council tax precept by as much as they're legally allowed to do. It's up to a maximum of £15 for the average household. Most households, it's far less than that in reality. So they've been very supportive of the money that they control locally. But the overwhelming majority still comes from central government. It still comes from national taxation. And, I'm not complaining about it, but I just know that we could deliver a far better service with just a little bit more, and that to keep cutting policing and to keep withdrawing those services is really difficult because it affects victims, witnesses, it affects what we do.
Definitely, and that's what I mean, that you have people who have reported something to you and they're hoping for a response. And because of the lack of resources that you have at your disposal, they may not get the quality of response that they may want or expect. And obviously that's the challenge, and there's that disconnect. But I mean, coming back to, for example, stop and search. Now, in the past, we've seen huge disparities in stop and search in other parts of the country, and in West Yorkshire as well. I mean, how much of that is of a real concern to you? Because many years ago, when I was part of the Stephen Lawrence group, that we did some studies on stop and search. And what we learned from that is a lot of particularly black young people of colour, when they're stopped and searched, that if the interaction between the police officer and them was done in a good, friendly way, then the relationship was, it was on a par, it was level. But sometimes the police officer, the way they operated, were quite aggressive, and that then became a barrier. I mean, do you do any monitoring about how your officers go about and do stop and search?
We do a fantastic amount of monitoring. Let me tell you this, we've reviewed every single stop and search of young black men across West Yorkshire independently, not by policing, and there's not one of them that was found to be inappropriate or unlawful. Every stop and search is on body worn video, every stop and search is recorded, and I encourage anyone who's got a complaint about stop and search to contact the police. There's an independent group, which you're probably aware of from previous roles, who independently scrutinise the stop and search, specifically for minority ethnic stop and searchers, which is members of the public who come in and they watch the body worn video, they go through everyone. I'm not saying there aren't sometimes issues with stop and search, because there is still disparity there, and not every officer gets it right every time, and not every officer is as polite as they should be. But I'm confident in West Yorkshire, the overwhelming majority of them are done correctly, legally and appropriately, and they're done to keep people safe. They're absolutely not there to target people. They're there to target drugs and knives and guns within our communities.
Which I think every community would accept.
That's why they're doing them.
Yeah.
And so the overwhelming majority, of them are appropriate and necessary. But stop and search has just become this iconic thing and this sort of touchstone of disparity and unfairness within communities. So we are open to any research, we're open to any feedback, we're open to academia coming in, and we encourage all of that with some of the local universities. But it's there to be scrutinised on body-worn video by independent members of the public, by external inspectorates, and I'll have any one of them looked at in that sense. But I'm equally bound with trying to keep people safe. And in areas of high knife crime use, in areas of high violence, that's where we go with the stops and searches.
And absolutely, it's quite right and quite necessary. And I think most surveys will say to you that generally the community would welcome that and do support it. That stop and search is a useful tool to have. But it's the application of the stop and search process itself where we hear sort of negative stories, and then that has a negative narrative about the relationship between the community and the police. I'm glad to hear what you said. I mean, you mentioned the independent body that scrutinizes your work. How do people access the independent body? If they want to refer something to them, what's the channel? Yeah,
it's on the website, on the West Yorkshire Police website. Through the internet, they can refer to it, they can contact them. The people on the independent groups are advertised and people can contact them direct, or ultimately they can send me an email or contact any one of my staff about it. But I come back to, be really interested to actually speak to the people who recently, in the last 5 years, have been stopped and searched in a way in which they don't like. I'd be really interested to hear from them, because things have changed so much, but we've still got a narrative and a reputation based on 5, 20, 30 years ago. I'm not saying that everyone is perfect, because they're human beings, but I think it's far better than people imagine. I think it's a far better interaction, all videoed, far more appropriate, far more courteous and far more decent than you imagine. But they're looking for knives, they're looking for drugs, they're looking for guns, they're looking for things that harm and hurt people. But I do get it. I do get, certainly within the black community, I do understand the feeling and the distrust based on history.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a historical thing, isn't it? I mean, we've seen in the past the interaction between the police and the African, Caribbean, and the Asian community. I mean, I remember in the 70s we had the National Front coming and marching in our towns, and we had a group of white and non-white people opposing them. And the police turned not on the National Front who came from outside, but the people who were opposing them. And I remember that those people, I mean, I'm going back to the 70s, long before your time, that the people felt that they needed protection and support from the police, rather than the police had turned against them, and they chased those who were protesting against the National Front. Rather than those who'd come from outside to create trouble.
The last 10 or 15 years when we've had the equivalent of the National Front, some would say, not me, but other far-right groups, for example, like the English Defence League and others, we've been there to police those groups and we've protected communities. And we've done exactly
there's a turnaround.
We've done exactly the opposite, in my view, as to what you've just described. So I won't comment on the 70s, but I'll comment on the last 20 years. I think, and that's where you said to me earlier, what's changed? I think we understand communities and we're closer to communities and minority ethnic communities far better than we've ever been. And I think they're our priority, to protect local people from other people who want to protest, but maybe want to protest in a way that's not palatable to the rest of us.
I mean, and obviously we've seen a huge increase in far-right activity. Unfortunately, in this country. In fact, in some quarters they're saying that we see a much higher increase in far-right activity as opposed to Islamic terrorism and Islamic sort of radicalization. Now, how much of a challenge is that for you at the moment?
Yeah, it is. We have an issue with self-radicalized, young, in the main, white men who follow an ideology. But they're getting drawn into things, sometimes through mental health, sometimes through their own issues. But we apply exactly the same principles. For us, it's terrorism. So we investigate it in the same way that we deal with it. We need people to come forward. We need people in their family and friends to highlight concerns around them. But yeah, of course, any type of terrorism is abhorrent, and it's, our duty to investigate it with other agencies the best we can. But as I said earlier, all of that work goes unseen and unknown to communities, and thankfully, we're in the main really successful at it.
I mean, obviously, as John says, and we've said this on this program before as well, and other programs that we run on TV, that if you come across anybody that you feel is going to do harm to our fellow brothers and sisters and citizens, then they must be reported to the police service as soon as possible, because we all want to be safe in our communities. We don't want anybody making any threats or taking action that will harm, regardless of who the victims are likely to be. And that is something important. That's a message that John is also giving. That if you know anybody who's engaging in this sort of activity, then they should be brought to the attention of the police service as soon as possible. I mean, one of the problems in large cities like Bradford, for example, is that this notion that there are certain areas where people from certain communities are engaged in antisocial activity, and the police are not taking any action. I'll be blunt here. I mean, I know in Bradford, for example, there's a group called Bradford for Better, who've been campaigning for road safety and etc. And they see, young men, and we've seen quite a number of them die in accidents as well, because they drive these fast cars, they lose control, and unfortunately, in one incident, I think 4 young men died a few years ago. But the perception is that the police don't really take any action against these people who are causing mayhem in the communities. Now, I know I recently read somewhere that you are going to be taking some action against electric scooter riders, those who ride on electric scooters, or on quad bikes, and I know a lot of that activity is going on. I mean, how do you challenge that perception that people have?
We do take a lot of action. Again, it's not seen. There's an irony there, isn't there, in the sense that would result in us stopping and speaking to a lot of young men in the main. But no, we do. We've got an operation in Bradford called Operation Steerside. It's been running for at least 5 years now. Right. It's a joint operation with the local authority and other agencies, specifically about antisocial use of the roads. Speeding, not wearing seatbelts, not complying with cameras, maybe not alcohol, but certainly use of drugs upon the roads, and distractions, use of mobile phones. More recently, we've created a situation where people can also upload data that they've taken on their own car cameras about antisocial behaviour and antisocial driving, and we're able to prosecute those people, which is a really good initiative. You'll be aware of automatic number plate cameras, and we're linking in with the local authority about the new clean air zone that they're creating as well. So we do take it. There's TV programmes called Police Interceptors, which shows the work. We've got a specific crime team called the Police Interceptors team, again, who are driving plain vehicles around Bradford and other cities in West Yorkshire. So again, down to resources, down to ability, but we're working really hard on that. But ultimately, communities and society has got to decide as to how it wants to drive on the roads. So if we go back to the use of alcohol, that's now seen as unpalatable in the main. The wearing of seatbelts is now seen as acceptable, and it should be. So speed, antisocial behaviour on the roads, the way in which people use vehicles, we need to, as a society, sort of clamp down and stop it. So
well, I mean, as I say, there's an organisation in Bradford called Bradford for Better. They've been on my programme before, and I saw something from them on WhatsApp a few days ago. That, for example, their campaign is on Leeds Road, for example, which I'm sure you'll know very well. That people are speeding and people are recklessly driving, and that they've complained about it, and the police didn't. In their opinion, in their view, the police have not taken much action. So that has an impact on the well-being of that community around Leeds Road.
It comes back to what we were saying earlier, because there's not enough police officers and staff to do it. So when there's long waiting lists in the NHS, there's long waiting lists, isn't there? Because there's not enough surgeons, not enough nurses, not enough doctors. When people are reporting issues of antisocial behaviour to the police, it's not that we don't care. We care desperately, but we're dealing with other things. So the officers who would be dealing with that are actually dealing with the fatalities, and they're dealing with other serious actions elsewhere. So the ability for police officers to then proactively target it, we'd love to do that. We'd absolutely love to be able to do that. So
what are your, as a force, as an operational commander for West Yorkshire, What are your key priorities area on which you're concentrating at the moment?
Well, ultimately, we're about reducing crime.
Right.
And so, we're about reducing crime of all aspects of it. But the majority of frontline patrol officers, the officers in uniforms going from job to job, they're dealing with mental health incidents, which is not a crime.
Yeah.
They're dealing with missing from home, which is not a crime. And then they're dealing with domestic abuse within households, which of course is a crime and an abhorrent crime. So a lot of our work is actually due to challenges in other parts of the public sector where there aren't enough resources elsewhere. So when things start going wrong, we're picking up the pieces, and then they're getting criticised for not being on Leeds Road, looking at roads policing incidents. So, the challenge for us is about harm. So when there's too much crime and too much in the system, we have to prioritise it, and we do it around what we would describe threat, harm and risk. So the highest threat and harm, that's where we have to go to. And that's where the challenge for policing is in trust and confidence. The things that people see the most on the streets, antisocial behaviour, bad driving, damage and theft, they're the crimes that we don't actually have the resources or enough resources that I'd like to deal with them, because we're dealing with burglary, robbery, assault, violence, homicides, counter-terrorism, serious road traffic collisions. So we're doing all of that serious end of stuff. And then the things that affect communities the most, very sadly, are the ones that we don't have the resources to deal with. So I think with, not too much, but with limited funding, we could be amazing as a police service.
I think by and large...
But every public sector would say that.
I think by and large, I'm sure the police service, and the majority of people would recognise the fact that you do a very good job. There's no doubt about it, within the limited resources that you have. But because you're responsible for the well-being of the community, of the citizens of West Yorkshire, basically, and people feel that by and large you do a good job. But the problem that always happens is when the person individually becomes a victim, their expectation is much higher. And obviously you can't deliver everything on their expectations. I mean, one of the things that I've always said is that people have a misconception about your role in the criminal justice system. I mean, it's a holy trinity, isn't it? You've got the police, the CPS, and then the judiciary. And people don't realise sometimes that, you may have dealt with a crime or an incident. You would have done your job, and you would have passed on. And for people who don't know this, the police will do the investigation. They will pass the file to the Crown Prosecution Service. And Crown Prosecution Service will look at all the information and then decide whether to take it to the next stage, which is take it to court. And then it goes to court, it goes to the magistrates or the Crown Court, depending on the severity of the crime itself. And police will have done their job, the CPS will have done their job. But when it goes to the judges or the magistrates, they just give somebody a slap on the wrist and say, thank you, don't do it again. Now, that will have a huge effect on you, wouldn't it? Because to the public, it's the police who failed us. So how do you navigate around that?
With great difficulty. I actually do believe that there should be a national review of the criminal justice system. I don't hold any one of those agencies you very articulately described, responsible. But it is a fact that 20 years ago, when we had the right to charge people, far more people got charged with criminal offences. But as you've said, we don't have that right anymore. It was taken away and given to the Crown Prosecution Service. They've got huge resourcing issues as well, as of the courts. And I worry that collectively, all of those pressures is resulting in not enough people getting charged and put to court before we even decide what happens at court. So I'm one of a few chief constables up and down the country who is asking for the right to charge people back.
So you want to take back the charging
I think it
control?
is, save the ones that go, apart from the ones that go to Crown Court, I think we know what good and bad charging looks like, and I think we should be able to charge people and get them through the system a lot quicker and get those people who are harming communities to court for rehabilitation or for punishment. That's a matter for the courts to decide upon. So I'd very much welcome that. But yeah, I come back to there's not enough money in the whole system. That puts pressures on it. But you're right, the police then get the brunt of it, that we're not taking action. It's not our decision. It's not our decision. The operational officers, the investigators desperately want to take action.
What sort of initiatives, actions are you taking to try and get the public to understand that you have done your job? You have collected the evidence, you've passed it on to CPS, and the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, are the ones who then take it forward. because people don't understand that relationship.
So the individual officers will explain that if they've got time. The individual officers do explain that, but again, they've got to do it carefully so that it doesn't sound like they're blaming another agency, if that makes sense, because we don't want to do that, because that doesn't help anybody either.
Right.
So they'll try and articulate that. Sometimes their frustrations will brim over, but you've got to, it comes back to the officers are on the side of the victim and the witness. The officers want to prosecute people who are harming people in society, so they'll do their best to describe it. But that's where I come back to. There should be a review, a Royal Commission on Criminal Justice, because I don't think it's doing anybody any good, the pressures that is in the whole system at this moment in time.
Right. Yeah, because I know for a fact that, you know, when I talk to sometimes victims, they are not aware of the second and the third part, or the, you know, this holy trinity, and for them the first point of call is the police. You came to investigate, you know, the crime that they were the victim of, and therefore it's your duty to make sure they end up in jail or whatever punishment they're going to get. And because, you know, it's so distant from you to this, you know, to the judiciary, and when I say judiciary, I mean, for those, I'm sure most of my audience will understand what I mean. We're talking about the magistrates and the courts. We have seen on many, many occasions where the police have asked for, you know, some other aspects of the post of the case to be taken into consideration. This is called added tariff, etc., and the magistrates have taken no notice of it. Because that's a huge challenge for you. But one of the things that is emerging, obviously, in the last few years is this thing called restorative justice. Now, again, I don't know how much of restorative justice activity, you know, West Yorkshire Police Force, and it's been proved in many, many cases that restorative justice has given victims a bit more satisfaction in the action that has been taken against the perpetrator. Do you promote that? And
yeah, we do, and we use it, and I agree with you. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. So again, restorative justice is trying to get to behind what the causes of that crime are for that offender, and it's trying to get the offender to understand the impact of it. So in a very simple example, if it's around criminal damage, then the offender will put the damage right, or pay for it to be right, or send a letter of apology. If it's around an assault or an offence with violence, they occasionally will meet with the offender and the victim to then ask some questions of that offender, and to put to bed some fears and apprehensions as to who and what they were. It's got to be done very carefully, and it's got to be done in the right environment. But yes, we do use it. We've got a number of charities who work on it, but it's trying to prevent further crime from happening. It's a preventative tool, but it's really good for victims and witnesses as well, because they get an apology, they get reparation, there's restoration as to what's happened, or if nothing else, an explanation as to why. And it just helps psychologically with some. It's not for all. Some people, you know, don't want to enter into it, but I think it is a good opportunity to try and prevent further crime and criminality from happening.
Oh yeah, I mean, for people who not heard of it or unaware of it, you know, I would suggest that you look into it, because if you are the victim of a crime, sometimes the better outcome is to go through the restorative justice process rather than going through the whole CPS, you know, the judiciary process itself, because you may get a quicker outcome and a result from that. And much more importantly, sometimes the perpetrator learns their lesson and therefore may not commit similar acts of, you know, violence or damage to other people as well. And that's something important, you know, that maybe people need to understand. But I mean, we're going through some challenging times at the moment. In the next few weeks, we're going to have some trials coming up in the West Yorkshire area, particularly around the grooming gangs. Now, we've always said that, you know, we abhor the activity of some of those young men who've been engaging in this evil act, you know, targeting the young women. And although the majority of women have been sort of white descent, there are some women from the Asian community as well. And anybody who's engaged in that activity has got no truck in the community, and they should be ostracized, and they should be identified and brought to the attention of the Criminal Justice Service. But that's going to raise some tension, I'm sure, there's no doubt about it. And it's been mentioned to me already that the next few weeks are going to be quite challenging while this court case is taking place. Have you put anything in place to try and sort of negate anything that may sort of confront that particular issue? Yeah,
I mean, we've been dealing with it for a good few years now, so we're very experienced at it. We've dealt with it across all of the towns and cities in West Yorkshire, so across Leeds, Bradford, Huddersfield, Halifax, Dewsbury, Batley, and we've had those trials ongoing for a number of years. we've got those trials ongoing for a good few years yet to come, you know, so I think they're now listing trials into 2024 and 2025, and they will continue. So we will follow the evidence, we'll follow what the victim says to us, and we'll prosecute those people from a variety of different backgrounds in it. But yes, we do. We have community monitoring. We work with local communities as well, whether that be councillors or local civic leaders. But I think we're past the time of big demonstrations and other groups coming into towns and cities, because, as I say, we've done so many of these trials now. So we will monitor and we'll protect people, and we will, specifically in this example, protect the Pakistani heritage community from any perception that it's a community issue in that sense. So we're there to help and look after people.
Because the far right have used that.
Yeah, in the past, and we've been there. We've seen it in Bradford, we've seen it in Leeds and Halifax. And you know, I'm not blasé about it, but we've dealt with it all before, and we'll deal with it again. But each case causes us to do that same engagement, that same supportive network around it.
And how closely are you working with communities, not just on that issue, but generally? I mean, community engagement was seen as one of the big issues for the policing service, particularly in these challenging times. Where you have the expectation on the one hand and the resource constraints on the other hand. How well is your engagement? I know you have the independent group, which has a separate role, but you know, in places like Ilkley and Shipley, and in Batley and places like that, you know, how robust or good is your engagement at the local community level? So
every ward, every area has a neighbourhood policing team still. They haven't gone. You know, they're there, they've got inspectors, they've got sergeants, there's PCs and PCSOs, and they're dedicated, and the words you used were dedicated and familiar staff, and they're local. There's not as many of them as we would like, but there are more per head of population in West Yorkshire and the other areas, so I'm very proud of that. And each of them has got a link into local community leaders, local key individual networks, local, whether it be shopkeepers or people who work in faith establishments or education establishments, and it's incumbent upon those neighbourhood policing teams to make those links. There's then other more formal structures about advisory groups in each and every area, but it's all there, it's all on the internet. There's probably far more going on than people imagine, but it's just hard for us to get that out sometimes and explain exactly what we are doing.
Because I mean, as I say, I mean, I remember in the 70s, you know, each sort of division had a independent advisory group.
Still got it
in those days, but I've not seen anything recently. You see, that's why I was. And I know people have asked me. I know you're going to be possibly going to sort of meetings in the community over the next few days as well. But that interaction, I wasn't sure how robust it is, and whether it's still going on or not.
It is still going on, and there's
because it's not really seen. That's why. You know, and it's one of those, again, perception issues, isn't it? You know,
so through any, you can contact the police. I suppose the benefit of technological changes with the intranet now and with email and with online, so you can contact us and see what's there, and they are there. All the neighbourhood policing team officers are there. You know, they advertise where the groups are and where they're meeting. There's far better engagement with faith groups. So, for example, here in Bradford, we've got, I think, 2, if not 3, faith liaison officers who've done nothing other than engage with faith groups. There's women's liaison officers as well, and there's all sorts of, you know, roles that it's hard to be seen all of the time. But
and
it's
you
a
work
balance.
with schools as well, don't you?
Yeah, and we've got an amazing new programme called POLED, Police Education. So I think we'll be the first county in the country to do a education programme across every age group, and I'm determined to get it across every school in West Yorkshire. So from 6 to 18, they'll go through a police education programme around, obviously it's age dependent, but about crime, hate crime, respect and dignity, sexual offences, consent, driving offences, and they'll go through a whole series of education programmes. But importantly for me, not delivered by police officers, but delivered by teachers, their own teachers, who will go through, you know, a special set of curriculum to deliver, and it'll build from 6 to 8 to 10 years old to 12 into their teens, and there'll be different lesson plans at different times. So I'm excited about it. There's 60% of the schools in West Yorkshire are now doing it, and I'm determined to keep going with it.
So is this already rolled out across majority of the schools?
Yeah, it's already started, and it's about an engagement programme. So it's to just help people understand what the police do, what they're about, but it's also about crime and criminality and crime prevention. but importantly not delivered by police officers, delivered by their own class teachers, which I think is an amazing initiative.
Right. But I mean, do you have visiting police officers going into schools as well?
We'll do that as well. We'll do that with uniformed officers. Yeah.
Young kids want to see a person in uniform.
We'll do that. We'll take the dogs in. We'll take them a car to see, and all of those things as well.
Yeah.
But I think the underlying thing around how to treat people in society with respect, you know, about hate crime, about dignity, about sexual offences, about consent. I think it's incumbent upon us to help educate the generations of the future around things, and that I've been determined to do.
And what's the response been like from young people?
Yeah, no, it's good. We're getting it academically researched by a university, and I think they engage with it. And it depends at different levels. They've all got a different view on things, but we'll be talking about knife crime, we'll be talking about drugs, so it's an educational thing, because then it's dispelling the myths and explaining what we're actually about.
Right. Can I ask maybe a difficult question? I mean, obviously Bradford has got a very mixed makeup, and particularly certain areas we have high proportion of people from the Pakistani, the Asian subcontinent community, and these young people may have a different attitude towards the police. Have you done any work around what do they think about the police? Because their experiences of life are very different, and therefore they may have a very different view of police and the policing service and the operation. What sort of feedback do you get from those young people when you go into schools or talk to them?
Yeah, so we also have youth advisory groups, especially in Bradford and other areas. And again, I think the perceptions shouldn't be driven by the media. I think the perceptions should be driven by the encounters and how they deal with. But again, we've now got, in the last 5 years, we've doubled the recruitment of people from minority ethnic backgrounds.
That was going to be my next question, but I know
but specifically in Bradford, from the Asian Pakistani community, the Asian Indian subcontinent, and I think that's brilliant. I think we need more women to join. That's still a challenge for us, and I would really welcome the community support on that. But I think that is now showing a more familiar, accessible, open police service, and you can just see the makeup of the police officers across Bradford. It's just changing, and it's changing for the better.
Right. Okay. But as I say, I mean, there's a school engagement also trying to recruit some young people into the police service. But I mean, the recruitment process has changed, hasn't it? I mean, people are now, the old days where you apply for a job, you have certain height requirements, etc., etc. Now you need to have a university degree in order to join the police service.
Yeah, and if you don't have one, we'll give you one as well.
Will you?
Yeah, no, that's it. So it's and that's all being reviewed at the moment.
Right.
But again, we've got specific uniform for female officers. We've got specific uniform for other faith-based as well. Yeah. But the entry route is there. Actually, we have a really good application level of particularly young Asian men. Not so much the young Asian females, but we have a real good level of people. So I think people are supportive and understand what policing is about. Less so from the black community for reasons that we've already understood. But I think I'm optimistic about the future and about the representation, because the more people from minority ethnic communities that join, the better for me.
Well, obviously, if the police force reflects the community, then hopefully automatically the people in the community will feel more comfortable with the police service, because I mean, one of the big issues is it was seen as a sort of white organisation, not for us type of thing. But that is going to change. I mean, in terms of recruitment, you said, obviously you made some inroads into that. And you continue to do that, don't you?
So about 1 in 10 police officers are from a minority ethnic background now in West Yorkshire.
Right.
But actually, it's about 25% of the new recruits are.
Oh, wow.
So we've got to do it very slowly, because I can't change 10,500 people. So in terms of the new recruits, between 20 and 25% are actually from minority ethnic backgrounds.
Oh, well done.
So we're up there in terms of bringing people in.
Excellent.
But that's just going to take a long time to change the organisation.
Obviously, as we've talked about, so policing is a huge challenge in any society, but particularly at this moment in time with all the austerity and the economic situation, etc., is even more challenging. And I don't envy your role. I mean, you've taken on this role at very challenging times. So obviously, we as a community need to make sure that we play our part, our role in helping the police, deal with some of the challenges that we face ourselves when it comes to criminal activity, etc. And this is something important. It should be a partnership between the police service and ourselves. But similarly, the police service needs to take into consideration some of the issues that impact on our communities as well, and I'm sure John and his team do. John, I'm really deeply grateful for you to coming and taking so much time of your time out and sharing your thoughts and your ideas and your vision for the future with me and my viewers. Hopefully, as we say, inshallah, we'll soon ask you to come back again, as Alison has done a couple of times. Hopefully we'll see you again in a few months' time and you can update us on progress. So can I say thank you, John, and to your colleagues.
Thank you.
I hope that you found this of interest. And there's many areas that we want to explore, but as I say to you every week, just as we get into the meat of some of the discussion, we run out of time. But I'm sure you'll have found John's ideas and thoughts and comments more reassuring. Certainly I'm more reassured, and hopefully I'll be back again next week when I'll be talking to one of the lawyers of some of the issues that affect us in our old age as well. So inshallah, I'll see you next week. Take care. Meantime, may Allah look after you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.